The fate of the 10,000 North Korean soldiers deployed in Russia is looking grim, and it's no exaggeration to say they might not last more than a few weeks. Why? Because some of them are reportedly fighting Ukrainian tanks with AK-47s. Yes, you heard that right. Bullets against heavily armored, multi-ton killing machines. It's not just absurd, it's downright suicidal. Here's the thing. Rifles like the AK-47 are iconic, reliable, and great for infantry combat. But when it comes to taking on modern tanks like Ukraine's T-72S or Leopard 2S, they're about as useful as throwing rocks at a battleship. The armor of these tanks is so thick that even high-caliber rounds bounce off, so you can imagine how much damage an AK-47 does. On the flip side, these tanks are armed to the teeth with high-explosive anti-tank rounds, machine guns, and advanced targeting systems. They can spot a target miles away and eliminate it before the enemy even knows what's coming. So when Russia sends soldiers armed with rifles to face them, they're not sending them into battle, they're sending them to their deaths. But it's not just the North Koreans being sent into these hopeless situations. Most of the soldiers fighting for Russia right now are facing similar problems. From poorly trained conscripts to prisoners pulled out of jails, the Russian military has made it painfully clear that it sees its troops as disposable. Adding North Korean soldiers into the mix hasn't fixed anything. In fact, it's made things worse. These soldiers are unfamiliar with modern warfare, can't communicate with their Russian counterparts, and frankly, seem to have been set up to fail. And here's where it gets worse for Russia. By bringing in North Korean soldiers, Putin has effectively internationalized the war. I mean, think about it. He's openly relying on foreign troops now. This move has only given Ukraine's allies more reason to step up their support. Look at what's happened since these North Korean troops arrived. The United States finally gave Ukraine the green light to use ATACMS missiles. Then the UK and France followed suit, allowing Storm Shadow and Scalp missiles to be deployed deep into Russian territory. It's just been 2 months since Ukraine started using these weapons, and the results are already devastating. Russian fuel depots are on fire. Ammunition storage sites are blown to bits. Command centers are reduced to rubble. Ukraine is systematically dismantling Russia's military infrastructure, and there's no sign of them slowing down. At this point, you've got to wonder, what was Putin thinking? Invading Ukraine was his first colossal mistake, but bringing in North Korean soldiers might just be his second biggest mistake ever. They're not trained for this kind of warfare. Their tactics are outdated, and their presence has only exposed more cracks in Russia's already shaky foundation. So what does this all mean for the war? Well, we'll break it all down in this video. We'll cover the impact the North Koreans have had or haven't had, the staggering casualties they've suffered, and some of the more bizarre incidents that have unfolded since their deployment. We'll also take a closer look at how Putin's decision to align with Kim Jong-un has not only backfired, but also made the world a far more dangerous place. Let's look at what Russia has achieved with its North Korean reinforcements. In late November, Russian and North Korean forces launched a joint operation and managed to capture a few small but strategically important villages in eastern Ukraine. These included Tolstai Lug, Zeleny Shliak, and parts of Nizhny Klin. On the surface, it doesn't sound like much, but their location along key supply routes makes them significant. Controlling these villages gives Russia better access to logistical corridors that support their frontline troops. However, this operation wasn't quick, nor was it easy, because Ukrainian forces were ready. Let me tell you that the battle for those regions was nothing short of a bloodbath. Between November 20th and December 5th, Russia deployed over 4,000 troops, including several hundred North Korean soldiers, to the front lines. Ukrainian forces, equipped with advanced drones and precision artillery, inflicted heavy losses. By the end of the 2-week offensive, Ukrainian sources estimate that Russia had lost over 1,200 troops. Add to that dozens of lost armored vehicles and destroyed artillery systems, and you're left wondering if it was worth it at all. But even this small victory for Russia came with a catch. Ukrainian forces had already fortified their positions around neighboring regions like Verkhnaya, Korobne, and Krasny Kut, making it incredibly difficult for Russia to expand its gains or even hold on to the newly captured areas. Reports from Ukrainian intelligence and military observers indicate that Russian and North Korean forces have suffered a casualty rate exceeding 30 to 40%. In these operations. That means for every 10 soldiers Russia and North Korea send into battle, at least 3 or 4 don't make it back. One of the reasons these battles have been so costly for Russia is Ukraine's superior use of drones and artillery. For instance, during the fight for Tolsty Lug, Ukrainian FPV drones targeted Russian supply lines and troop formations with devastating precision. Additionally, Ukrainian forces laid extensive minefields along key roads and routes leading to Zeleny Shliak. These mines forced Russian and North Korean units to abandon their armored vehicles and proceed on foot, making them easy targets for Ukrainian artillery. This is just one of the dozens of fights happening in the Kursk region alone. So when you step back and look at the broader situation, these minor victories don't amount to much. Russia might be using the North Koreans to plug gaps in their lines and mount offensives, but they're not gaining the kind of momentum they need to turn the tide of the war. So far, over these past few months, we've seen countless reports. Almost every week, a new update emerges about dozens, sometimes even hundreds, of North Korean soldiers dying in action. The numbers just keep piling up. According to South Korea's National Intelligence Service, approximately 3,000 North Korean soldiers have been killed or severely wounded since their deployment began. That's already a huge chunk of the estimated 10,000 to 12,000 North Koreans sent to fight alongside Russian forces. But it gets worse. Ukrainian President Zelensky estimates that the figure is even higher, closer to 4,000 casualties, which includes both killed and injured. More recently, the BBC Russian service reported on January 22nd that as of mid-January 2025, around 1,000 North Korean soldiers had died in Russia's Kursk Oblast. Now, that number only accounts for confirmed deaths. It doesn't even include the wounded or the missing, which likely pushes the total casualties into the thousands. If you add it all up, the overall number of casualties could be well over 5,000. That's nearly half of the North Korean deployment. You see, this kind of devastation is starting to have a real impact on the battlefield. In some areas, North Korean troops have pretty much disappeared from the front lines entirely, likely pulling back to lick their wounds after taking a serious beating. But here's the thing, despite these catastrophic losses, nothing seems to be changing on the Russian side. Instead of learning from their mistakes, adapting their strategies, or even properly training their reinforcements, Putin appears hell-bent on doubling down on the same broken strategies. It's like watching someone repeatedly try to force a square peg into a round hole, convinced it'll work if they just hit it hard enough. Now, even South Korean officials aren't holding back in their criticism. They're calling out the fact that North Korean troops are essentially being consumed in frontline assaults. And it's not just the experts saying this. Ukrainian soldiers on the ground are sharing firsthand accounts that highlight how dire the situation is for these troops. Take the front lines near Suja, for example. In this region, North Korean units are often sent in at night in small groups of 10 to 15 soldiers. They approach cautiously, entering villages from multiple directions in what's clearly an attempt at surprise. But it's not working. Even the Russians know this won't work, and yet they send the Koreans in. Why? Well, to absorb enemy fire. And when I say absorb, I mean it. Their primary purpose isn't to achieve any real objectives, it's to draw Ukrainian fire and take the bullets. Once they're down, Russian troops move into the positions they occupied, and only then does the real fight begin. And if that's not bad enough, Russian commanders seem equally incapable of learning from their mistakes. In a different battle, on or before January 18th, Russian air assault forces launched an attack on a Ukrainian garrison in Kursk Oblast. They sent 8 BMD infantry fighting vehicles along the exact same roads they'd been using since November. Yes, the same roads. Predictably, Ukrainian forces destroyed 4 of the 8 BMDs. At this point, you'll have to wonder, what are they expecting? Do they think Ukraine is going to let them through one day out of sheer pity? Even Russian military bloggers are starting to openly criticize their leadership. One blogger sarcastically referred to the commanders as geniuses for their stubbornness. Meanwhile, a Ukrainian Marine Corps drone operator, Kriegsforscher, described these attacks as embarrassingly easy to counter. According to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, the combined Russian-North Korean field army of 60,000 soldiers in Kursk Kursk has already suffered up to 35,000 casualties from trying to throw out the 20,000 Ukrainians in the oblast. Despite repeated efforts, Vladimir Putin's forces have made little progress. Putin himself has repeatedly pushed back deadlines for recapturing Kursk. Last fall, after multiple failures and heavy losses, the Kremlin extended the deadline to February 2024, only to abandon it later. At this rate, don't be surprised if Russia misses whatever new deadline they set, if they even bother setting one at all. It's the same story over and over again, sending poorly trained and under-equipped troops to random places, deploying human wave attacks into predictable Ukrainian traps, or unbelievably relying on North Korean soldiers with AK-47s to face off against heavily armored tanks. These aren't just mistakes, they're catastrophes waiting to happen. The truth is, neither the Russian nor North Korean troops were ever set up to succeed. They're being thrown into battle with odds stacked against them from the very beginning. For the North Koreans, it's even worse. Add in language barriers, complete inexperience, and a paralyzing fear of failure, and you've got a recipe for disaster. One glaring example of just how dysfunctional this alliance is happened on December 14th. Ukraine's military intelligence agency reported that a group of North Korean soldiers opened fire on vehicles carrying members of the Chechen Akhmat unit who were fighting for Russia. 8 Russian soldiers were killed in this friendly fire incident. Now, this could have been a case of miscommunication. North Korean troops likely couldn't understand orders or distinguish allies from enemies, or it could just be sheer incompetence. Either way, it's a devastating blow to Russian morale and a bitter pill for the Kremlin to swallow. And let's not pretend this is the first time something like this has happened. Russian soldiers have a history of turning on their own. There have been countless reports of Russian officers executing soldiers who tried to retreat from the front lines. Others have been shot for attempting to surrender to Ukrainian forces. In some cases, disobedience or even minor mistakes have led to summary executions. Plus, the North Koreans are now taking this absurdity to another level by committing suicide. You see, according to a description by Ukrainian soldiers, Ukrainian special forces were searching the bodies of more than a dozen dead North Korean enemy soldiers after a battle in Russia's snowy western region of Kursk. Among the bodies, they found one North Korean soldier still alive, but as they approached him, he detonated a grenade, killing himself in the process. Fortunately, the Ukrainian forces managed to escape without injury, but this tragic moment speaks volumes about the kind of mindset that's been drilled into these soldiers. According to reports from North Korean defectors, soldiers in their ranks are trained with the belief that being captured by the enemy is the ultimate form of betrayal. They're instructed to always carry a final bullet or grenade with them to ensure they never fall into enemy hands alive. This is a deeply ingrained mindset within the North Korean military, and it's confirmed by South Korean intelligence officials. Lee Seong-kwon, a member of South Korea's Parliamentary Intelligence Committee, corroborated that memos found with the bodies of dead North Korean soldiers showed explicit orders to choose self-destruction over being captured, emphasizing the importance of protecting their country's secrets and maintaining Pyongyang's narrative. John Kirby, a spokesperson for the White House, agreed on this matter. He revealed that many North Korean soldiers have taken their own lives out of fear of what would happen to their families if they were captured. It's this kind of trauma and terror that these soldiers are living under. Imagine being thrown into a foreign country, forced to fight in a war you didn't know you were signing up for, and then told that if you get captured, your family will pay the price. Given everything we've discussed, it's no surprise that the North Koreans have proven to be more of a liability than an asset to Russia. Their lack of training, inadequate equipment, and deep-rooted psychological fear and trauma make them almost useless in the field. It's clear that these soldiers have been sent to die. Nothing more, nothing less. And speaking of trauma, let's take a look at another grim and bizarre incident. This one happening before the North Koreans even entered the picture. So when Ukraine launched its counteroffensive and pushed into Kursk, Vladimir Putin reportedly gave his forces a hard deadline that was to recapture the region by October 1st. But as we've come to expect, that didn't happen. The Russians missed the deadline, and instead of regrouping and reconsidering their strategy, they continued throwing themselves at Ukrainian positions with the same ineffective tactics. During one of these failed attempts to push back Ukrainian forces, a brutal and chilling event unfolded. On the western edge of the Ukrainian salient, near the village of Leonidovo, Russian troops from the infamous 155th Naval Infantry Brigade managed to capture a team of Ukrainian drone operators. This might sound like a small victory on paper, but what followed turned it into something far more sinister. After overtaking the 9 Ukrainians, the Russians reportedly stripped them down to their underwear, forced them to lie face down on the ground, and executed them by shooting them in the head. All 9 were killed in cold blood, and as if that weren't enough, the same brigade allegedly decapitated 4 Ukrainian prisoners in a separate incident, placing their heads on pikes for display. Yes, pikes in the 21st century. It's hard to even process the sheer barbarity of these acts. Perhaps they believed this would send a message to the Ukrainians, a warning to back off or face the same fate. But here's the thing. It didn't work. If anything, it backfired spectacularly. Instead of demoralizing the Ukrainian forces, it had the opposite effect. These atrocities lit a fire in the hearts of Ukrainian soldiers, and they responded with cold, calculated vengeance. In the days that followed, a powerful Ukrainian force began hunting down and ambushing groups of 155th Naval Infantry Brigade Marines. And let's just say, they weren't in the mood to take prisoners. On October 18th, paratroopers from Ukraine's 95th Air Assault Brigade cornered a group of 155th Naval Infantry Brigade Armored Personnel Carriers, APCs, and tore them apart using drones, tanks, missiles, and mines. In this single engagement, they reportedly destroyed 3 APCs and killed 30 Russian Marines, and that was just the start. In the following week, Ukraine's 47th Mechanized Brigade, fresh from weeks of rest and retraining, launched a coordinated assault near Novoivanovka, just north of Zeleny Shliak. They fought in well-coordinated teams using M1 Abrams tanks and M2 Bradley fighting vehicles to unleash devastating firepower. Meanwhile, Ukrainian Marines rolled into Zeleny Shliak from the south in T-64 tanks and M113 APCs, blasting Russian positions and vehicles as they advanced. The assault didn't stop there. Ukrainian paratroopers attacked from the west, targeting Russian sappers laying mines on roads in and around Zeleny Shliak. In a single engagement, they killed 7 Russian engineers and cleared the area for further advances. The result of this relentless Ukrainian counteroffensive was nothing short of devastating for the 155th Naval Infantry Brigade. What remained after the smoke cleared was a literal graveyard, not just of Russian soldiers, but of loads of destroyed military equipment scattered across the main road through Zeleny Shliak. By the end of October, analysts had documented losses estimated to be worth tens of millions of dollars. So when a heavily armored, highly experienced Russian brigade like the 155th Naval Infantry can be wiped out so decisively, what hope do the undertrained, poorly equipped North Koreans have? This brings us to the final question. Who's the real winner here? And how has Vladimir Putin's decision to align with Kim Jong-un not only backfired, but also made the world a far more dangerous place? Let's start with the first question. The answer, without a doubt, is Kim Jong-un. Sure, on the surface, it seems like a risky move. Sending thousands of North Korean soldiers and ammunition into a foreign war could backfire horribly for the regime. But when you dig deeper, the rewards far outweigh the risks. At least for Kim, it does. For one, North Korea is getting billions of dollars from Russia. This is a lifeline because North Korea's economy has been crumbling for years, hammered by international sanctions, mismanagement, and natural disasters. The money pouring in from Russia isn't just propping up the regime, it's funding the military programs that Kim uses to maintain his grip on power. Whether it's paying off loyal elites, maintaining an oppressive surveillance state, or advancing its missile programs, this financial boost is crucial for the North Korean leadership. Then there's the strategic leverage. For decades, North Korea has been the weird kid that everyone avoids, largely ignored on the global stage except when it conducts missile tests or threatens nuclear war. But now, by aligning with Russia, Kim has catapulted himself into a much more prominent position. Suddenly, he's not just the dictator of an isolated, impoverished state. He's a key player in a critical alliance that's challenging the Western-led world order. That kind of attention gives Kim the bargaining power he's craved for years. Russia is also providing massive amounts of food aid to North Korea because this is something that North Korea desperately needs. The country has been dealing with chronic food shortages for decades, but recent years have been particularly harsh. Floods, droughts, and sanctions have pushed millions of North Koreans to the brink of starvation. Russia, for its part, has already sent thousands of tons of wheat and corn to North Korea, with reports suggesting even larger shipments could be on the way. Now here's where it gets really troubling. This alliance is not just about money and food. Kim is also getting technology, and lots of it. Reports suggest that Russia is providing North Korea with advanced weapons technology technology, satellite technology, and possibly even nuclear technology. You see, it's no secret that North Korea has been trying to perfect its missile capabilities for years, especially intercontinental ballistic missiles or ICBMs that can reach the United States. With Russian expertise, they can significantly improve missile guidance systems, propulsion technology, and warhead designs. This means Kim's missiles are not just getting more numerous, they're getting more accurate and more deadly. Then there's satellite technology. North Korea's attempts at launching spy satellites have been laughable so far, with repeated failures and crude designs. But with Russian support, Kim could soon have real satellite reconnaissance capabilities. That means North Korea could monitor South Korea, Japan, and even US military activity in real time, giving it a whole new level of strategic insight. Perhaps one of the most overlooked is nuclear technology. While there's no direct evidence yet that Russia is sharing nuclear secrets with North Korea, the possibility can't be ruled out. Even indirect assistance, such as sharing materials, equipment, or scientific expertise, could accelerate North Korea's nuclear weapons program for a regime that's already one of the most provocative nuclear powers in the world. This is a terrifying prospect. And finally, there's the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Treaty, signed by Russia and North Korea in 2024. This treaty isn't just a symbolic handshake, it's a bold declaration of their mutual commitment. Essentially, it's a mutual defense pact, stating that if either country comes under attack, the other is obligated to jump in and provide immediate military support. This solidifies their alliance in a way that's hard to ignore and sends a clear message to the world: we've got each other's backs. The most striking part of the treaty is Article 4, which lays out the mutual defense clause. If either Russia or North Korea is attacked, the other side must provide military assistance immediately. This clause has sent ripples across the international community, particularly in South Korea, which is watching this development with growing alarm. The implications are serious. Imagine a scenario where a conflict erupts on the Korean peninsula. Russia would now be contractually obligated to step in. The very idea of Russian troops getting directly involved in a Korean conflict is a nightmare for South Korea and its allies, fundamentally altering the strategic calculus in Northeast Asia. Then there's Article 3, which takes a slightly different approach. Instead of focusing on what happens if war breaks out, this clause outlines how Russia and North Korea will handle rising tensions during peacetime. Essentially, if either country feels that an invasion or serious threat is imminent, they'll begin consultations immediately to plan a coordinated response. This might sound straightforward, but it's actually a significant shift. Historically, North Korea has been notoriously unpredictable. During the Cold War, both China and the Soviet Union often found themselves frustrated by Pyongyang's reckless behavior. Kim's predecessors would make aggressive moves, such as missile tests or provocations along the demilitarized zone, without consulting their supposed allies. Inevitably, it was left to China or the USSR to clean up the diplomatic mess. With this treaty, Russia and North Korea are attempting to create a system that ensures better communication and coordinated decision-making. But there's a downside. By formalizing this kind of collaboration, Russia is now tying itself even closer to North Korea's decisions. If Kim Jong-un decides to act recklessly, Moscow might find itself dragged into a conflict it didn't plan for. Similarly, if Russia finds itself in trouble, say in Ukraine, North Korea could feel obligated to offer more support, even if it stretches their already limited resources. For South Korea, this growing partnership is nothing short of a nightmare scenario. The balance of power in Northeast Asia has always been delicately maintained, with South Korea leaning heavily on its alliance with the United States to deter North Korean aggression. But now, with Russia openly backing North Korea, the dynamic shifts in Kim's favor. I mean, think about it. If Kim perceives that his forces have made meaningful gains in places like Kursk, where North Korean soldiers are already fighting alongside Russian troops, he could see this as a validation of his military's effectiveness. That confidence could translate into bolder actions on the Korean peninsula. For instance, Kim might decide to test South Korea's defenses with more aggressive posturing or even limited military engagements. The Russia-North Korea alliance sets a dangerous precedent for other rogue states. By aligning with a major power like Russia, North Korea is essentially proving that international isolation can be overcome if you find the right partner. This could embolden countries like Iran to seek similar partnerships, further destabilizing global security. And now, to make matters worse, South Korea's military suspects that North Korea is preparing to send even more troops to fight alongside Russian forces. If true, this marks yet another escalation in an already precarious alliance, with ripple effects that could extend far beyond the battlefields of Ukraine.